The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a scent that clung to the back of my throat as I sat in the back row, my hands folded tightly in my lap. My fingers traced the edge of my sleeve, a nervous habit I'd never shaken, even now at 26. Outside, the Midwest autumn was turning the trees to fire, but in here, the air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I wasn't supposed to be here today. I'd told myself I wouldn't come, that I didn't need to see this to move on. But when Detective Mitchell called me last week, her voice steady but urgent, asking if I'd be willing to testify, something in me shifted. I wasn't that 16-year-old girl anymore, the one who'd stood trembling in her mother's kitchen, begging to be believed. I was Emily Hayes, and I was done being silent. 10 years ago. I thought telling the truth would save me. I thought if I could just find the words, if I could make my mom and dad see what Jack had done, they'd wrap me in their arms and make it all go away. I was 16, tall and gangly, with blonde hair I had always hated because it made me stand out. I'd spent years hiding in oversized sweaters, trying to disappear. Jack was my stepfather, the man my mother married when I was 12 after my dad left us for a new life in Chicago. Jack was charming, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they mattered. He was a businessman, owned a small hardware store in our little town of Willow Creek, where everyone knew his name and shook his hand like he was some kind of hero. But I knew the truth. I knew the way his eyes lingered too long, the way his hand brushed against me when no one was looking, the way he'd slip into my room at night and whisper things that made my skin crawl. I'd kept it inside for years, swallowing the shame like it was my own. But when I was 16, something broke. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where the sun spilled through the kitchen window and the smell of bacon filled the house. My mom was at the stove, humming an old country song, and Jack was reading the paper, his glasses perched on his nose like he was just another dad. I don't know why that moment felt like the one. Maybe it was the way he looked at me over the rim of his coffee mug, a smirk that said he knew I'd never tell. I stood up, my chair scraping against the linoleum, and the words came out before I could stop them. Mom, Jack's been hurting me. The room went quiet. My mom turned, her spatula frozen in midair, grease dripping onto the counter. Jack's paper rustled as he set it down, slow and deliberate. I remember the way my heart pounded, like it was trying to break free from my chest. I told them everything, 4 years of secrets, of nights I'd spent curled up in my closet, praying he wouldn't come in. I told them about the bruises I'd hidden under long sleeves, the threats he'd whispered to keep me quiet. My voice shook, but I kept going because I thought, asterisk, this is it. They'll believe me. They'll protect me. Asterisk. But my mom's face twisted, her eyes narrowing like I'd slapped her. What are you talking about, Emily? She snapped. That's ridiculous. Jack would never. She stopped, her hand gripping the counter. Jack just sat there, his face calm, almost pitying, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. She's confused, Susan, he said, his voice smooth as ever. Teenagers, you know how they get. My dad, well, he wasn't my real dad anymore, just the man who'd raised me before he left. Wasn't there that day, but when my mom called him later, he didn't say much. He just sighed, like I was a problem he didn't want to deal with. They didn't believe me. Worse, they blamed me. My mom said I was ungrateful, that I was trying to tear our family apart. She said I was jealous of Jack, that I wanted attention. She cried, but not for me. For herself, for the life she thought I was ruining. I stood there, my hands shaking, my throat burning, and I realized something. They'd chosen him. They'd chosen the man who'd hurt me over their own daughter. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't have much, just some clothes, a notebook I used to sketch in, and a photo of me and my mom from when I was little, back when she'd braid my hair and tell me stories about the stars. I left a note on my bed. I'm sorry you didn't believe me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I caught a bus to Indianapolis, stayed with a cousin who didn't ask too many questions, and started over. I got a job at a diner, saved up for community college, and eventually landed a gig as a graphic designer. I built a life piece by piece, like putting together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But no matter how far I ran, the past was always there, a shadow I could never quite shake. I was 26 when the call came. I was in my apartment, a small place with big windows that let in the morning light. I was sipping coffee, sketching a logo for a client, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer. Emily Hayes? A woman's voice said. This is Detective Laura Mitchell with the Willow Creek Police Department. I need to talk to you about Jack Hayes. My stomach dropped. I set my mug down, my hand trembling so bad the coffee sloshed onto the table. Detective Mitchell's voice was calm but firm, like she was used to delivering bad news. She told me they were investigating Jack, that other women had come forward with stories that sounded too much like mine. She'd found my name in an old report, one I'd filed at 16 before my mom convinced me to drop it. We think you might have information that could help, she said. Would you be willing to talk? I didn't answer right away. I walked to the window, stared out at the city waking up below. A memory hit me. Me at 10, sitting on the porch with my mom, eating popsicles that stained our fingers red. She'd told me, You're stronger than you know, Em. I hadn't felt strong then, and I didn't feel strong now. But I thought of those other women, the ones who were speaking out, and I knew I couldn't stay silent again. I'll talk, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper dot. The next few days were a blur. I met with Detective Mitchell at a coffee shop halfway between Indianapolis and Willow Creek. She was in her 40s with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. She didn't push, didn't make me feel like I owed her anything. She just listened as I told her everything, every detail I'd buried, every moment I'd tried to forget. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping the edge of her cup. You're not alone anymore, Emily, she said. We're going to make sure he pays for what he did. I wanted to believe her, but I'd heard promises before. Still, something about her made me trust her, maybe because she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me like I was someone who could fight, Dot. Then came the call from my mom. I was in my car, parked outside my apartment, when my phone lit up with her number. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since I left. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity, or maybe anger, got the better of me. Emily? Her voice was frantic, the way it used to get when she was scared. You need to come home. The police were here asking about Jack. They're saying awful things, and I don't know what to do. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. What do you want me to do, Mom? I asked, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. You didn't believe me when I told you the truth. Why should I help you now? She started crying, babbling about how she didn't know, how she thought I was confused, how Jack had always been so good to her. I listened, but I didn't feel the old ache, the one that used to make me want to fix things. I felt something else, something cold and clear, like a lake after a storm. I can't protect you anymore, I said. I've spent too long protecting someone who didn't deserve it. I hung up, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free, Dot. The weeks that followed were like walking through a fog. Everything felt heavy, but I could see shapes moving in the distance, pieces of a truth I'd waited years to face. I went back to Willow Creek, not because I wanted to, but because Detective Mitchell asked me to meet with her and the other victims. The drive was 3 hours, and I spent every mile fighting the urge to turn around. The Midwest stretched out around me, fields of corn and soybeans glowing gold under the October sun, and I remembered how I used to love this place. As a kid, I'd ride my bike down these roads, the wind pulling at my hair, pretending I was flying somewhere far away. Now, every mile felt like a step back into a life I'd tried to bury. Willow Creek hadn't changed much. The main street still had the same diner with its faded red awning, the same hardware store where Jack used to work, though the sign now read, Under New Management. I parked outside the police station, a squat brick building with a flagpole out front, and sat in my car for a long time, my hands resting on the wheel. A memory flickered. Me at 14, sitting in this same parking lot after I'd tried to tell a school counselor about Jack. She'd called my mom, who'd come to pick me up, her face tight with anger. You don't go spreading lies, Emily, she'd said, her voice low and sharp. I'd stared out the window, watching the flag snap in the wind, and promised myself I'd never speak up again. Inside the station, Detective Mitchell was waiting. She led me to a small conference room where two other women sat, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. One was in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her hands fidgeting with a tissue. The other was younger, maybe 20, her eyes red like she'd been crying. They looked at me and I saw it, the same fear, the same shame I'd carried for years. But there was something else too, a quiet strength, like they'd decided they weren't going to let Jack win. We're here to share what we know, Detective Mitchell said, her voice steady. You don't have to say anything you're not ready to, but every detail helps. She looked at me, her eyes kind but expectant, and I nodded, even though my stomach twisted. Dot. The older woman, Sarah, spoke first. She'd worked at Jack's store a few years back, and she told us about the late night shifts, the way he'd lock the door and make comments that made her skin crawl. I thought it was just me, she said, her voice breaking. He made me feel like I was crazy. The younger one, Kayla, was quieter, her words barely above a whisper. She'd been a neighbor, a kid who'd trusted Jack because everyone in town did. Her story was so close to mine it hurt to listen, like hearing my own pain in someone else's voice. Dot. When it was my turn, I didn't know where to start. I told them about the years of silence, the nights I'd spent planning my escape, the way my mom's denial had cut deeper than anything Jack had done. I told them about the courtroom, how I'd sat in the back, watching Jack's face as the charges were read, his charm cracking like cheap paint. I thought I'd feel better seeing him there, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. But it's not enough, not yet. Sarah reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. It's never enough, she said softly. But it's a start. That night, I stayed at a motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled like cigarette smoke. I couldn't sleep, so I sat by the window watching the headlights of passing cars. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my boyfriend, who'd been my rock through all of this. Asterisk, you okay? He wrote. I stared at the screen, trying to find the words. Marcus was the kind of man who listened, really listened, with his dark eyes steady and his hands always ready to pull me close. We'd met in college, bonded over late night coffee and a shared love of old jazz records. He knew my story, not all of it, but enough to understand why I sometimes woke up gasping, my heart racing like I was still that scared kid. I'm trying, I texted back. It's just a lot. You're stronger than you know, he replied. And I smiled because it was the same thing my mom used to say, back when she still felt like my mom. Dot. The next morning, I drove to the old house. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it, to prove it couldn't hurt me anymore. The street was quiet, the lawns neatly trimmed, the kind of place where secrets hid behind picket fences. Our house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling around the windows, the porch sagging like it was tired. I parked across the street and just sat there, my hands gripping the wheel. A memory hit me at 8, sitting on that porch with my dad, eating watermelon and spitting the seeds into the grass. He'd laughed, his eyes crinkling, and told me I was going to grow a watermelon patch in my belly. It was one of the last times I'd felt safe. Dot. The front door opened and my mom stepped out, a trash bag in her hand. She froze when she saw my car, her face pale under the morning light. For a moment, I thought about driving away, but something kept me there. She walked toward me, her steps slow, like she was afraid I'd bolt. When she reached the car, I rolled down the window and we just looked at each other, two strangers who used to be everything. Emily, she said, her voice small. I didn't know you were coming. I didn't either, I said. And it was the truth. Dot. She shifted the trash bag to her other hand, her eyes darting to the ground. Can we talk? She asked. Please. I wanted to say no, to tell her she didn't get to ask for anything after what she'd done. But there was something in her face, a crack in the wall she'd built, and I nodded. We sat on the porch, the same one where I'd eaten watermelon with my dad. And for a long time, neither of us spoke. The air smelled of damp leaves and distant wood smoke, and I noticed the way her hands trembled, the way her wedding ring was gone. I didn't know, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I swear, Emily, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I said, and the words came out sharper than I meant. I told you, Mom. I begged you to listen. She flinched, her hands twisting in her lap. I thought you were confused. Jack was so good to me, to us. I couldn't believe. She stopped, her breath catching. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who'd raised me. The one who'd danced with me in the kitchen to old radio songs. The one who'd cried when my dad left. But I also saw the woman who'd chosen a lie over her own daughter, and that hurt more than anything Jack had done. Why now? I asked. Why believe me now? She didn't answer right away. She stared out at the street, her eyes distant. The police came, she said. They showed me things. Pictures, statements. I couldn't pretend anymore. And then I found something. Her voice broke and she reached into her pocket, pulling out a small folded piece of paper. She handed it to me, her hand shaking. I unfolded it and my breath caught. It was my note, the one I'd left on my bed 10 years ago. I'm sorry you didn't believe me. The ink was faded and the edges worn like she'd carried it with her all this time. I found it in your room, she said. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe I knew deep down that you were telling the truth. I stared at the note, my vision blurring. I wanted to scream, to ask her why she hadn't come for me, why she'd let me carry this alone, but I didn't. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket because it didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to me, to the girl who'd survived. I can't fix this, I said, my voice steady. I can't make it okay for you, but I'm done carrying your guilt. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to comfort her. I stood up, brushed the dust off my jeans, and walked back to my car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, saw her standing on the porch, small and alone, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I wasn't forgiving her, not yet, but I was letting her go. The drive back to Indianapolis felt different, like I'd left something behind in Willow Creek. Not just my mom, but a piece of the weight I'd carried for so long. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that promised rain but hadn't decided when to let it fall. I kept the radio off, letting the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the road fill the silence. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside my thoughts were a tangle of memories and questions. What did it mean to move on? Was it forgiveness or was it just learning to live with the scars? I didn't have answers, but for the first time, I felt like I didn't need them right away. When I got home, Marcus was waiting for me. He was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, his sleeves rolled up, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. The apartment smelled of garlic and olive oil, and the soft glow of the lamp made everything feel warm, safe. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes searching mine. You okay? He asked, setting the knife down. I nodded, dropping my bag by the door. Yeah, I think so. He didn't push, just pulled me into a hug, his arms strong and steady. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the quiet thud of his heartbeat. Marcus had this way of making the world feel smaller, like the chaos couldn't touch us as long as we were together. You don't have to tell me anything, he said, his voice low, but I'm here when you're ready. I smiled, pulling back to look at him. I know, just give me a little time. He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Take all the time you need, Em. We ate dinner on the couch, a simple meal of pasta and salad, the kind of thing that felt like home. I told him about the meeting with the other victims, about Sarah and Kayla, about the way their stories had mirrored mine. I told him about seeing my mom, about the note she'd kept, about the way I'd walked away without looking back. He listened, his fork paused halfway to his mouth, his eyes never leaving mine. When I was done, he reached for my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on my skin. You're incredible, you know that? He said. Most people would have broken. I shook my head, a lump rising in my throat. I did break, I said. I just learned how to put the pieces back together. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Marcus's arm draped over me. The city hummed outside, a distant symphony of car horns and streetlights. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who'd hidden in her closet, clutching a flashlight like it could keep the darkness away. I thought about the woman I was now, the one who'd sat in a courtroom and faced the man who'd tried to destroy her. They were the same person, but they weren't. Somewhere along the way, I'd found a strength I didn't know I had. Not in the big moments, but in the small ones. The mornings I'd gotten out of bed, the nights I'd chosen to keep going. The next few months were a whirlwind. Detective Mitchell kept me updated on the case, her calls coming at odd hours, her voice always calm but tinged with determination. Jack had been arrested, charged with multiple counts of assault and abuse. His name splashed across the local news like a stain. The town of Willow Creek, with its perfect lawns and Sunday potlucks, didn't know how to handle it. People whispered in the diner, shook their heads at the hardware store, but some still defended him, saying he was a good man who'd been misunderstood. It made my blood boil, but I wasn't surprised. Small towns have a way of clinging to their illusions, even when the truth is staring them in the face. Then came the twist, the one I hadn't seen coming. Detective Mitchell called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice different this time, heavier. Emily, there's something you need to know, she said. We've uncovered evidence that your mother knew more than she let on. I was in my office, a small space I rented downtown, surrounded by sketches and color swatches. My hand froze on the pencil I'd been holding, the point snapping against the paper. What do you mean? I asked. My voice barely steady dot. Mitchell hesitated like she was choosing her words carefully. We found letters, she said, from Jack to your mother, written years ago. They reference incidents, things he did, things she promised to keep quiet. We also have testimony from a neighbor who says your mother confronted Jack about you back when you were 16, but she chose not to act. The room spun. I set the pencil down, my hands trembling. A memory flashed. My mom standing in the kitchen, her face pale, as I told her about Jack, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. I'd thought it was disbelief, but now I wondered if it was guilt. What happens now? I asked, my voice hollow. She's been charged as an accessory, Mitchell said, for covering up his crimes. It's not just about you, it's about the other victims, too. She could face jail time. I hung up, my breath shallow, and stared out the window. The city was alive below, people moving through their lives, oblivious to the way mine had just shifted. My mom, the woman who'd braided my hair and cried when I left, had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. She'd chosen him not just over me, but over the truth, and now she was paying for it. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to scream, to drive back to Willow Creek and demand answers. Part of me felt a strange, quiet relief, like the final piece of a puzzle had clicked into place. I'd spent years blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently, but now I saw it clearly. It was never about me. It was about her, her fears, her weaknesses, her refusal to face the man she'd married. I called Marcus, my voice shaking as I told him everything. He came to my office, sat with me on the worn leather couch, and held my hand as I cried. Not the loud, desperate sobs of a child, but the quiet tears of a woman who'd finally let go. What do I do now? I asked, my voice muffled against his shoulder. You keep going, he said simply. You've been doing it all along. The trial was set for the spring, and I spent the winter preparing, not just for my testimony, but for the life I wanted after. I started therapy, something I'd resisted for years, thinking I could handle it on my own. My therapist, a woman with kind eyes and a knack for asking hard questions, helped me unravel the knots in my chest. The ones I'd tied so tightly I didn't even know they were there. I talked about Jack, about my mom, about the years I'd spent running from myself. I talked about the small moments, too. The smell of my mom's perfume, the way the sun hit the lake behind our house, the sound of my dad's laugh before he left. Those memories hurt, but they also reminded me of who I was, who I could still be. I saw Sarah and Kayla again, at a support group Detective Mitchell had organized. We met in a community center, a place that smelled of floor wax and old books, and we talked not just about Jack, but about our lives now. Sarah was starting a new job, Kayla was applying to college, and I was working on a project, a series of illustrations about healing, inspired by our stories. We laughed, cried, shared coffee that tasted like it had been brewed hours ago. It wasn't friendship, not exactly, but it was something deeper, a bond forged in pain and survival. When the trial came, I was ready. The courtroom was the same one I'd sat in before, but this time I wasn't in the back row. I took the stand, my hands steady, my voice clear. I looked at Jack, his face older now, his charm gone, and I told the truth. Not just for me, but for Sarah, for Kayla, for every woman he'd hurt. I saw my mom in the gallery, her face pale, her hands clasped like she was praying. I didn't look away, but I didn't linger either. This wasn't about her anymore. When it was over, Jack was sentenced to 20 years, my mom to 3 for her role in the cover up. The gavel fell and the room exhaled, but I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. I felt quiet, like the world had finally stopped spinning. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky a soft pink as the sun set over the courthouse. I stood on the steps, my coat pulled tight, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The weeks after the trial were quiet, almost too quiet, like the world was giving me space to catch my breath. I went back to my life in Indianapolis, to my apartment with its big windows and the sketches pinned to the walls, to Marcus and his steady presence, to my work that felt like a lifeline. But something had shifted inside me, a subtle realignment, like a bone that had finally set after years of being broken. I wasn't the same Emily who'd driven to Willow Creek months ago, her hands trembling on the wheel. I was stronger, not in a loud, triumphant way, but in the way a tree grows stronger after a storm. Its roots deeper, its branches more resilient. I spent a lot of time alone those days, not because I was sad, but because I needed to understand who I was now. I'd sit on my balcony in the evenings, a mug of tea warming my hands, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. The air carried the faint smell of rain and exhaust, and I'd let my mind wander, tracing the edges of memories I'd once pushed away. There was the summer I was 9 when my mom and I spent a whole afternoon catching fireflies in mason jars, laughing as they blinked like tiny stars. There was the morning I left home at 16, the bus station cold and gray, my backpack heavy on my shoulders. There was the first time Marcus kissed me, soft and tentative like he was afraid I might break. Those moments weren't just memories. They were pieces of me, and I was learning to hold them gently, without letting them cut. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into my graphic design projects, especially the series of illustrations I'd started for the support group. Each piece was a story. Sarah's hands clasped around a coffee mug, Kayla's eyes bright with hope, my own silhouette against a sunset, strong but scarred. I worked late into the night, my desk lamp casting a warm glow over my sketch pad, the world outside fading to a hum. My clients noticed the change in my work, the way the colors were bolder, the lines more confident. "There's so much feeling in these," one said, her voice soft with awe. I smiled because she was right. I was pouring everything into those drawings: pain, healing. Truth. Marcus was my anchor through it all. He'd come over after work, his tie loosened, his hair a little messy from running his hands through it. We'd cook together, bumping into each other in my tiny kitchen, laughing when the sauce splattered or the bread burned. One night, as we sat on the couch with a bottle of wine, he looked at me, his eyes serious. "You're different," he said. Not in a bad way, but like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're lighter." I sipped my wine, the glass cool against my lips. "I think I'm finally letting go," I said. "Not of everything, but of the parts that don't belong to me anymore." He nodded, his hand finding mine. "I'm proud of you, Em. You know that, right?" I squeezed his hand, my heart full. Marcus didn't try to fix me, didn't push me to be anything other than who I was. He just loved me, scars and all, and that was enough. But the past wasn't done with me yet. A month after the trial, I got a letter from my mom. It came in a plain white envelope, her handwriting shaky but unmistakable. I stood in my kitchen, the letter unopened in my hands, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to let it disappear into the trash with the coffee grounds and takeout containers. But another part, the part that still remembered her laughter and her warmth, needed to know what she had to say. I sat at the table, the morning light streaming through the window, and opened it. The letter was short, written on lined paper, the kind she used to keep by the phone for grocery lists. Asterisk Emily, asterisk, asterisk. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I've spent the last month thinking about what I did, what I didn't do, and I can't make it right. I was weak and I was wrong, and I lost you because of it. I'm serving my time now, and I'm trying to understand who I am without Jack, without the lies I told myself. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know that I see you now. I see the woman you've become, and I'm so proud, even if I have no right to be. I love you. Always. Asterisk, asterisk, mom asterisk." I read it twice, then set it down, my hands steady, but my chest tight. I didn't cry, but I felt the weight of her words, the truth and the pain woven together. I thought about the woman who'd written it, sitting in a cell, her world stripped down to concrete and regret. I thought about the girl I'd been, desperate for her love, and the woman I was now, who didn't need it the same way. I didn't write back, not yet, but I kept the letter, tucked it into a drawer with the note I'd left her all those years ago. Maybe one day I'd respond. Maybe I wouldn't. For now, it was enough to know she'd finally seen me. Life moved forward the way it always does. I saw Sarah and Kayla again at a coffee shop this time, not a community center. We talked about normal things, jobs, dating, the way the leaves were turning early this year. But we also talked about the trial, about how it felt to see Jack behind bars, about the strange emptiness that came after. "It's like I won, but I'm still waiting for something," Kayla said, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I know," I said. It's not about him anymore. It's about us. Sarah nodded, her eyes bright. We're still here, she said. That's what matters. I started volunteering with a local organization that supported survivors of abuse, sharing my story in small groups, helping others find their voice. It wasn't easy, standing in front of strangers, laying my pain bare, but every time I did, I felt a little lighter, like I was giving away pieces of the hurt I'd carried. I'd look out at the faces in the room, some tear streaked, some guarded, and I'd see myself in them. I'd tell them what I wished someone had told me. You are enough. Your truth is enough. One evening after a session, I drove to the lake outside the city, a place Marcus and I had found during one of our late night drives. The water was still, reflecting the last of the sunset, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. I sat on the shore, my knees pulled to my chest, and thought about the journey I'd been on. Not just the trial, but the years of silence, the years of rebuilding. A memory came, unbidden. Me at 12, before Jack, sitting by a different lake with my dad, skipping stones across the water. Make a wish, Em, he'd said, his voice warm. I'd wished for a family that would never break. I didn't get that wish, but I got something else. I got myself. I got a life I'd built from the ground up, a love that held me without caging me, a voice that no one could silence. I picked up a stone, smooth and cool in my hand, and skipped it across the water, watching the ripples spread. The lake swallowed the stone, but the ripples kept going, reaching farther than I could see. I stood, brushing the dirt from my jeans, and took a deep breath. The air was crisp, the sky a deep indigo, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not perfect, not unbroken, but whole. I drove home, the road stretching out before me, and I knew, no matter what came next, I was ready. The past would always be there, a shadow at the edges, but it didn't own me anymore. I did, Dot. The months that followed felt like a new chapter, one I hadn't known I was ready to write. Life settled into a rhythm, not perfect, but steady, like the slow pulse of a river finding its way. I woke each morning to the smell of coffee brewing in my apartment, the sunlight spilling across my hardwood floors, and the quiet certainty that I was building something real. My work as a graphic designer was thriving. Clients were calling with bigger projects, and my illustrations, the ones inspired by the survivors' stories, were gaining attention. A local gallery even reached out, asking if I'd consider an exhibit. I'd laughed when I read the email, a nervous, disbelieving sound, but Marcus had grabbed my shoulders, his eyes bright. This is you, Em, he'd said. This is what you've been working toward. The idea of showing my work to the world felt daunting, like standing naked in a room full of strangers. Those drawings weren't just art, they were pieces of my soul, raw and unfiltered. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wanted to do it. Not for the recognition, but for the chance to share something true. I spent weeks preparing, sketching late into the night, my hands stained with charcoal and ink. I'd pause sometimes, my fingers hovering over a half-finished piece, and remember the girl who used to hide her drawings under her bed, afraid Jack would find them and twist them into something ugly. That girl was still part of me, but she wasn't in charge anymore. Dot Marcus was my biggest cheerleader, but he wasn't the only one. Sarah and Kayla came to my apartment one weekend, armed with takeout and a bottle of cheap wine, and we spent hours talking about the exhibit. They'd both agreed to let me include pieces inspired by their stories, and as we sat cross-legged on my living room floor, passing around egg rolls and laughing over spilled soy sauce, I felt a warmth I hadn't known I could feel. You're doing something big, Emily, Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. Not just for you, but for all of us. Kayla nodded, her eyes bright. It's like, you're giving us a voice, even when we couldn't speak. I looked at them, these women who'd walked through fire and come out stronger, and I felt a swell of pride, not just for them, but for myself. We'd survived, not just Jack, but the silence, the doubt, the weight of a town that wanted to look the other way. We were still here, and that was a victory, Dot. The exhibit opened on a chilly April evening, the gallery packed with people I didn't know and a few I did. Marcus stood by my side, his hand warm in mine as I gave a short speech, my voice shaking but clear. I talked about the stories behind the art, about pain and healing, about the power of truth. I didn't mention Jack or my mom by name, but their shadows were there, woven into every line and shade. When I stepped down, the room erupted in applause, and I felt a rush of something I couldn't name, pride, relief, maybe even joy. Afterward, as people milled around, sipping wine and studying my work, Detective Mitchell found me. She was out of uniform, her hair loose, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. You did good, Emily, she said, her smile warm. This is, it's powerful. I blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. Thanks for coming, I said. It means a lot. She nodded, her eyes scanning the room. I've seen a lot in my job, she said after a moment. A lot of pain, a lot of people who don't make it through, but you're a fighter. You remind me why I do this. Her words stayed with me long after she left, a quiet anchor in the chaos of the night. I thought about them as I drove home, the city lights blurring past, Marcus's hand resting on my knee. I thought about them as I lay in bed, the moonlight filtering through the curtains, my heart full but calm. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living fully and fiercely in a way I'd never thought possible. But life, I'd learned, never lets you settle too long. A few weeks after the exhibit, I got another letter from my mom. This one was different, longer, written on plain prison stationery, the ink smudged in places like she'd hesitated before sending it. I found it in my mailbox on a Saturday morning, the air crisp with the promise of summer. I took it to the park near my apartment, sat on a bench by the pond, and read it slowly, letting each word sink in. Emily, I've been thinking about you every day since the trial. Not just about what I did, but about who you are, who you've always been. I see now how strong you were, even when you were little, the way you'd stand up to the world with those big blue eyes. I failed you, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I haven't earned it. But I want you to know I'm trying to be better, to understand why I made the choices I did. I'm in a program here, talking to people who help me see things clearly. It's hard, but it's honest. And I owe you that much. Asterisk, asterisk, I heard about your art show. Someone sent me a newspaper clipping, and I cried when I saw your name, your work. You've built something beautiful out of so much pain, and I'm in awe of you. I don't know if you'll ever want to see me again, and I'll respect whatever you choose, but if you ever do, I'll be here, trying to be the mother you deserve. Asterisk, asterisk. I love you, Emily. I always will. Asterisk, asterisk, mom, asterisk. I folded the letter, my hand steady, and watched the ducks glide across the pond, their ripples catching the morning light. I didn't feel the anger I'd expected or the hurt that used to claw at me. I felt quiet. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something softer, like the first step toward understanding. My mom wasn't the villain I'd made her out to be, but she wasn't the hero I'd wanted either. She was human, flawed, and broken, and she was finally trying to face it. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw the letter away. I tucked it into the same drawer as the others, a small collection of truths I wasn't ready to let go of. Maybe one day I'd see her, sit across from her in a visiting room and listen to what she had to say. Maybe I'd tell her about my life, about Marcus, about the art that had saved me. Or maybe I'd let the silence stay, a boundary I'd earned. Either way, it was my choice, and that felt like freedom. Summer came, warm and golden, and I found myself looking forward in a way I hadn't before. Marcus and I took a trip to the coast, a spontaneous decision that felt like a gift. We rented a little cottage by the ocean, spent our days walking the beach, collecting shells, and talking about the future. One evening, as the sun sank into the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, he took my hand and looked at me, his eyes soft. I want this with you, Em, he said. All of it. The messy stuff, the good stuff, everything. I smiled, my heart full. Me too, I said, and meant it. Back in Indianapolis, I kept volunteering, kept creating, kept healing. I saw Sarah and Kayla when I could, our bond a quiet strength that didn't need words. I thought about the other victims, the ones I'd never meet, and hoped they were finding their own paths. I thought about Jack, locked away, his power stripped, and felt a calm satisfaction, not because he was suffering, but because he couldn't hurt anyone else. One morning, as I sat on my balcony with my coffee, watching the city wake up, I realized something. I wasn't running anymore. Not from the past, not from myself. I was here, rooted in this moment, in this life I'd built. The scars were still there, faint but permanent, but they didn't define me. They were just part of the story, one I was still writing. I picked up my sketch pad, the pages worn from use, and started to draw. A woman standing by a lake, her hair catching the wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon. It was me, but it was also every woman who'd fought to be heard, every soul who'd found their way back to themselves. The pencil moved, steady and sure, and I smiled. Because I knew, no matter what came next, I was enough, Dot. The fall came softly, with leaves turning crimson and gold, and a crispness in the air that made every breath feel like a fresh start. I'd always loved this season, the way it felt like the world was pausing, reflecting before the quiet of winter. My life had settled into something that felt almost ordinary, but it was the kind of ordinary I'd fought for. Mornings spent sketching over coffee, evenings with Marcus debating which old movie to watch, weekends volunteering at the survivor support group. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that made it beautiful. My art career was growing in ways I hadn't expected. The gallery exhibit had opened doors, local newspapers wrote about it, and a few bloggers shared my work online, calling it raw and transformative. I blushed at the praise, but it fueled me to keep going. I started a new series, this one focused on small moments of resilience: a hand reaching for a door, a foot stepping into a puddle, a face turned toward the sun. Each piece was a reminder that healing wasn't always grand or dramatic. It was in the quiet choices, the ones no one else saw. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, surrounded by sketches and half empty coffee cups, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Unknown calls still made my stomach twist, a leftover reflex from the days when every ring could mean bad news. But I answered, my voice steady. Hello? Emily Hayes? The voice was warm, professional, with a faint Southern accent. This is Rachel Carter from the Indianapolis Art Council. We saw your exhibit last spring, and we'd love to talk about featuring your work in our annual showcase next year. I froze, my pencil slipping from my fingers. The Indianapolis Art Council was a big deal. Their showcase drew thousands of people, from collectors to curators. I, wow, I stammered, then laughed, embarrassed. I mean, thank you. I'd love to talk about it, Rachel chuckled, her warmth putting me at ease. Great, I'll send you the details. Your work, Emily, it's special. It's got a heartbeat. I hung up, my heart racing, and immediately called Marcus. He was at work, but he answered on the first ring, his voice bright. What's up, Em? I told him about the call, the words tumbling out, and I could hear his smile through the phone. That's my girl, he said. You're gonna blow them away. I laughed, leaning back in my chair, the sunlight streaming through the window. I'm freaking out a little, I admitted. Good, he said. That means it's real. That night, we celebrated with pizza and a walk through the city, the streets alive with the hum of fall. Marcus held my hand, his fingers laced through mine, and we talked about the future. Not just the showcase, but the life we were building. He'd been hinting at moving in together, and though the idea made my heart flutter, I wasn't scared. With Marcus, I felt safe, not because he protected me, but because he saw me. Every scar, every strength, and loved me anyway. But even as my life moved forward, the past had a way of lingering, like dust settling in corners you thought you'd cleaned. I hadn't heard from my mom since her last letter, and I'd made peace with the silence. I wasn't ready to see her, wasn't sure I ever would be, but I didn't hate her anymore. That was progress, I thought, letting go of the anger without forcing forgiveness. Then, one morning, I got a call from Detective Mitchell. I was in my kitchen slicing an apple for breakfast when my phone lit up. Mitchell's voice was calm, as always, but there was an edge to it, like she was bracing herself. Emily, I wanted to give you a heads up, she said. Your mother's been released early. Good behavior, and the prison's overcrowded. She's out on parole. I set the knife down, my hand steady, but my mind reeling. When? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Yesterday, she said. I don't have details on where she's staying, but I thought you should know. If you need anything, a restraining order, a contact plan, just say the word. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there, staring at the apple, its flesh browning in the air. A memory flickered. Me at 10. Sitting at this same table in our old house, my mom cutting apples for me, her hands quick and sure. She'd hum as she worked, a tune I could never place, and I'd feel safe, like nothing could touch us. Now, the thought of her out there free made my chest tighten. Not with fear, but with something heavier, grief maybe, for the mother I'd lost long before the trial. I didn't tell Marcus right away. I needed time to sit with it, to figure out what it meant. That evening, I went to the lake, the same one I'd visited after the trial. The water was calm, reflecting the fading light, and I sat on the shore, my knees pulled to my chest. I thought about my mom, about the woman she'd been and the woman she might be now. I wondered if she was still in Willow Creek, living in that sagging house, or if she'd moved somewhere new, trying to start over like I had. I wondered if she thought of me, if she carried the weight of her choices like I'd carried mine. A week later, I saw her. It wasn't planned. I was at a farmer's market downtown, picking out tomatoes with Marcus, when I looked up, and there she was, standing by a stall of homemade jams. She looked older, her hair grayer, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying something heavy. She didn't see me at first, and for a moment, I thought about turning away, blending into the crowd. But then her eyes met mine, and time seemed to stop. Marcus felt my hand tense in his. Em? He whispered, following my gaze. Is that? I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, she took a step toward me, then stopped, like she wasn't sure she had the right. The market buzzed around us, kids laughing, vendors calling out prices. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I let go of Marcus's hand and walked toward her, my steps slow but steady. When I reached her, we just stood there, inches apart, strangers and family all at once. Emily, she said, her voice soft, almost broken. I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know you were out, I said, and the words came out calmer than I felt. She nodded, her hands twisting the strap of her bag. I wanted to call, but I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the lines etched into her face, the weight in her eyes. She wasn't the woman who'd shouted at me in the kitchen, or the one who'd chosen Jack over me. She was someone else, someone trying to piece herself back together just like I had. I don't know what I want, I said honestly, but I'm here. She nodded again, tears welling in her eyes. That's enough, she said. For now, that's enough. We didn't hug, didn't make promises. I didn't invite her to coffee or ask where she was staying. But I gave her my number, scribbled on a receipt, and when I walked away, I felt lighter, like I'd set down a stone I'd been carrying too long. Marcus was waiting, his eyes soft with understanding, and he pulled me close as we walked back to the car. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said and meant it. I think I am. The encounter stayed with me, not as a resolution, but as a moment of clarity. My mom and I might never be close again, but we weren't enemies either. We were two people who'd hurt each other, who'd lost each other, and who were trying, in our own ways, to find a path forward. That was enough for now. Life kept moving, the way it always does. The Art Council showcase was confirmed, and I spent the winter preparing, my days filled with sketches and meetings, my nights with Marcus in the quiet comfort of home. I kept volunteering, kept connecting with Sarah and Kayla, kept telling my story to those who needed to hear it. The past was still there, a shadow that never fully faded, but it didn't scare me anymore. It was part of me, but it wasn't all of me. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, the city glittering below, I picked up my sketch pad and drew a new piece. A woman standing at a crossroads, her face calm, her eyes fixed on the horizon. It was me, but it was also every survivor, every soul who'd fought to reclaim their life. The pencil moved, steady and sure. And I smiled because I knew, no matter what came next, I was ready. The story wasn't over, it never really is. But I was writing it one line at a time, and that was enough. Winter wrapped Indianapolis in a quiet chill, the kind that made you crave warm blankets and hot drinks. My apartment became a haven, filled with the glow of string lights and the scent of cinnamon from the candles Marcus insisted on buying. I'd wake to frost patterns on the windows, intricate as lace, and spend my mornings sketching by the radiator, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Life felt full, not in a loud, overwhelming way, but in the steady hum of purpose and love. The Indianapolis Art Council showcase was looming just a few months away, and I was pouring everything into it, every stroke of my pencil a piece of the story I'd fought to tell. But even in the warmth of my new life, the past had a way of slipping through the cracks. My mom's number sat on my phone, a quiet presence I hadn't used since the farmer's market. I thought about her often, not with the old ache, but with a curiosity I hadn't expected. What was she doing now? Was she still in Willow Creek, rebuilding her life in the shadow of her mistakes? Or had she left, chasing a fresh start like I had? I didn't call, but I didn't delete her number either. It was a small choice, but It felt like a step towards something I couldn't yet name. One snowy afternoon, I was at the support group, sitting in a circle of folding chairs in the community center. The room smelled of stale coffee and damp coats, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. I'd been leading these sessions more often, sharing my story and helping others share theirs. Today, a new woman joined us, her name tag reading Claire. She was in her 50s with graying hair and hands that fidgeted in her lap. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was soft, almost lost in the hum of the heater. I didn't think I'd ever tell anyone, she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. It was my brother in law years ago. I was just a kid, and my family, they didn't believe me. I carried it for so long I forgot how to let it go. I listened, my heart tightening, because her story was so close to mine. When she finished, the room was quiet, the kind of silence that holds space for pain. I leaned forward, my hands clasped. You're here now, I said. That's a start. And you're not alone. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw a flicker of relief, like a weight had shifted just enough to let her breathe. After the session, she lingered, helping me stack chairs, and we talked. Not about her story, but about small things like the snow piling up outside and the best place to get hot chocolate. It was a moment of connection, fragile but real, and it reminded me why I kept coming back. This work wasn't just about healing myself, it was about holding space for others, about building something stronger than the pain dot. That evening, I met Sarah and Kayla for dinner at a diner downtown, a place with checkered floors and a jukebox that played songs from the 80s. We ordered burgers and milkshakes, laughing as Kayla tried to get the jukebox to play without jamming. Over the hum of conversation and the clink of dishes, we talked about our lives. Sarah's new promotion, Kayla's college applications, my art showcase. But we also talked about the harder stuff, the way the trial still lingered in our dreams, the way we sometimes caught ourselves looking over our shoulders. I saw a guy at the grocery store last week who looked like Jack, Sarah said, her voice low. I froze right there in the cereal aisle. It wasn't him, but for a second, I get it, I said, stirring my milkshake. I still check the locks on my door twice before bed. It's like he's gone, but his shadow's still there. Kayla nodded, her straw between her lips. Do you think it ever goes away? She asked. The fear? I thought about it, my fingers tracing the edge of my glass. I don't think it goes away, I said. But it gets quieter. You learn to live louder than it. They both smiled, and we sat there. Three women who'd rebuilt their lives from the wreckage, sharing fries and stories like it was the most natural thing in the world. I looked at them and felt a swell of gratitude, not just for their friendship, but for the way they reminded me of my own strength. Marcus and I were closer than ever, our lives intertwining in ways that felt both thrilling and grounding. He'd started leaving his toothbrush at my place, his favorite coffee in my pantry, and we'd talk about moving in together like it was inevitable, not scary. One night, as we lay in bed, the snow falling softly outside, he propped himself up on one elbow and looked at me, his eyes serious. I want to marry you someday, Em, he said, his voice soft but sure. Not now, not if you're not ready, but someday. My heart skipped, not with fear, but with a warmth that spread through my chest. I reached for his hand, my fingers lacing through his. Someday, I said, smiling. I like the sound of that. The showcase was set for early spring, and as the date approached, my days were a blur of preparation. I worked with Rachel from the Art Council, choosing pieces, designing the layout, writing descriptions that felt honest without bearing too much. The gallery space was bigger than the one from my first exhibit, with high ceilings and walls that seemed to hum with possibility. I'd walk through it after hours, my footsteps echoing, and imagine how my work would look, how it would feel to share it with the world. But the night before the showcase, I hit a wall. I was in my apartment, surrounded by sketches and packing boxes, when a wave of doubt crashed over me. What if the work wasn't good enough? What if people saw through it, saw the broken girl I used to be? I sat on the floor, my back against the couch, and let the tears come, quiet and steady. A memory surfaced, me at 15, sitting in my room in Willow Creek, sketching to escape, my hands shaking as I heard Jack's footsteps in the hall. I'd thought I'd never be free of him, of the fear, but here I was, on the verge of something big, and I was terrified of failing. Marcus found me there, his keys jingling as he let himself in. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me, his shoulder warm against mine. You're allowed to be scared, he said after a while. But you're not that kid anymore. You're Emily Hayes, and you've got this. I leaned into him, my tears slowing. What if I mess it up? I whispered. You won't, he said, his voice steady. And even if you do, you'll keep going. That's who you are. He was right. The next day, I stood in the gallery, my heart pounding, but my head high as people filled the space. My work hung on the walls, bold and unapologetic, and I watched as strangers studied it, their faces softening, their whispers full of awe. Sarah and Kayla were there, beaming like proud sisters, and Detective Mitchell came too, her nod a quiet acknowledgement of the journey we'd shared. Marcus stayed by my side, his hand brushing mine, and when I gave my speech, my voice didn't shake. This work is about survival, I said, my eyes scanning the crowd. It's about the moments that break us and the ones that put us back together. It's for everyone who's ever had to fight to be heard. The applause was warm, but it was the quiet conversations afterward that stayed with me. People sharing their own stories, their own scars, their own victories. I listened, my heart full, and realized this was bigger than me. It was about connection, about truth, about the power of standing in your own light. As the night wound down, I stepped outside, the spring air cool against my skin. The city was alive, its lights twinkling like stars, and I felt a peace I'd never known. A memory flickered. Me at 16, standing at the bus station, promising myself I'd survive. I'd done more than survive. I'd built a life, a love, a legacy. The past was still there, a quiet echo, but it didn't own me. I was free, not because the pain was gone, but because I'd learned to carry it with grace. I looked up at the sky, the stars faint but steady, and smiled. The story wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The spring after the showcase felt like a deep exhale, as if I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally let it go. Indianapolis was alive with the hum of new beginnings. Trees budding, sidewalks buzzing with people shedding their winter layers, the air carrying the faint sweetness of blooming lilacs. My life, too, was blooming in ways I hadn't dared imagine. The showcase had been a success, not just in terms of sales or press, but in the way it had solidified something inside me. I wasn't just an artist or a survivor. I was a woman who'd claimed her story, and that felt like a quiet triumph. My days were full, a tapestry of work and love and small, precious moments. I'd wake early, the morning light filtering through my curtains, and sketch at my kitchen table, my coffee growing cold as I lost myself in the lines. My latest project was a commission for a local women's shelter, a mural that would cover one of their walls, a vibrant scene of growth, with roots twisting into wings, symbolizing the journey from pain to freedom. I'd visit the shelter to plan, sitting with the director in her cluttered office, listening to stories that echoed my own. It was hard, but it was also healing, a reminder that my work could be a bridge for others. Marcus and I were planning to move in together, a decision that felt both monumental and natural. We'd spent a Saturday touring apartments, laughing at the quirks of each one. A creaky floor here, a tiny balcony there, until we found a loft downtown, with big windows and enough space for my art and his record collection. As we signed the lease, our hands brushing over the paperwork, I felt a flutter of excitement, not just for the new place, but for the life we were building. This is it, Em, he said, his eyes bright. Our next chapter. I smiled, leaning into him. I liked the sound of that. But even in the brightness of my new life, the past had a way of whispering. I hadn't heard from my mom since the farmer's market, and though I'd made peace with the distance, there were moments when I wondered about her. Was she okay? Was she finding her way? Or was she still lost in the wreckage of her choices? I didn't dwell on it, but the questions lingered, like a song stuck in the back of my mind. One evening, I was at the support group sharing a story about the showcase when Claire, the woman who'd joined us months ago, raised her hand. She'd been coming regularly, her voice growing stronger each week, and tonight she looked different, calmer, like she'd settled into herself. I wrote a letter to my sister, she said, her hand steady in her lap. The one who didn't believe me. I didn't send it, but writing it helped. It was like I was finally saying what I needed to. I nodded, my heart tightening. That's powerful, I said. Sometimes just putting it down is enough. She smiled, a small, grateful thing, and I thought about my mom's letters tucked away in my drawer. I hadn't written back, hadn't known what to say, but Claire's words stayed with me, a quiet nudge to face what I'd been avoiding. That night, I sat at my desk, the apartment silent, except for the hum of the city outside, and pulled out a sheet of paper. I didn't know if I'd send it, but I needed to try dot asterisk. Mom, comma, asterisk, asterisk. I don't know where you are now or what your life looks like, but I've been thinking about you. Not with anger, not anymore, but with a kind of sadness for what we lost. I read your letters and I believe you're trying to be better. That means something, even if I'm not sure what yet. I'm not ready to see you, not ready to forgive, but I'm not closing the door either. I've built a life I'm proud of art, love, a purpose that keeps me going. I hope you're finding something like that too. Maybe one day we'll talk, and maybe we won't. But I wanted you to know I'm okay. More than okay, dot asterisk asterisk, Emily asterisk. I folded the letter and set it aside, my hands steady but my chest full. I didn't send it, not yet, but writing it felt like a release, like I'd loosened a knot I hadn't known was there. I slipped it into the drawer with the others, a quiet promise to myself that I'd decide when I was ready. Dot life kept moving, the way it always does. I saw Sarah and Kayla for coffee, our conversations a mix of laughter and depth, like always. Sarah was dating someone new, a quiet guy who made her smile in a way I hadn't seen before. Kayla was thriving in her first semester of college, her texts full of excitement about her classes and new friends. We didn't talk about Jack much anymore, but he was there, a shadow we'd learned to step around. I had a nightmare about him last week, Kayla admitted, stirring her latte. But when I woke up, I wasn't scared. I was just done. I nodded, understanding. He doesn't get to win, I said. Not anymore. The mural at the shelter was coming together, and I'd spend hours there, my hands covered in paint, the women and kids watching as the wall transformed. One girl, maybe 10, with braids and a shy smile, would sit nearby, sketching in a notebook. You're good at this, I told her one day, peeking at her drawings. Dot. She blushed, tucking her pencil behind her ear. You're better, she said. Your pictures make me feel safe. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. That's the best thing I've ever heard, I said, and meant it. Dot Marcus. And I moved into the loft in early summer, our boxes piled high, our laughter echoing off the bare walls. We spent our first night on a mattress on the floor, eating takeout and dreaming about how we'd make the place ours. I want a big table, I said, leaning against him. For art, for dinners, for everything. And a record player, he added, kissing my temple. For dancing, I smiled, my heart full. Deal. As summer faded into fall, I got a call from Rachel at the Art Council. They wanted to take my work on a small tour, showcasing it in galleries across the Midwest. It was a dream I hadn't dared to dream, and when I told Marcus, he lifted me off the ground, spinning me until we were both dizzy. You're unstoppable, Em, he said, his voice full of pride. Dot. But the real gift came later, in a quiet moment I hadn't expected. I was at the lake, my favorite place to think, sitting on the shore with my sketch pad. The water was still, the air cool, and I was drawing. A woman walking toward the horizon, her shadow long but light. A memory came, unbidden. Me at 12, sitting by the lake in Willow Creek. My mom beside me, our feet dangling in the water. You're my brave girl, she'd said, her voice warm. I hadn't felt brave then, but I did now. I closed my sketch pad and looked out at the water, the ripples catching the last of the sunlight. The past was still there, a quiet presence, but it didn't weigh me down. I'd faced it, not just Jack and my mom, but the girl I'd been, the one who'd thought she'd never be whole. I was whole now, not because the scars were gone, but because I'd learned to wear them with pride. I stood, brushing the dirt from my jeans, and took a deep breath. The air was crisp, the sky a deep indigo, and I felt a peace that ran deeper than words. My story wasn't over, it never would be, but it was mine, every chapter, every line. I walked back to my car, the stars beginning to emerge, and smiled, because I knew no matter what came next, I was home. Dot. The fall of that year was a whirlwind, a beautiful chaos of new opportunities and quiet moments that grounded me. The Midwest tour for my art was confirmed, with stops in Chicago, St. Louis, and Cleveland, each city a chance to share my work with new eyes. I'd lie awake at night in the loft, Marcus's steady breathing beside me, and feel a mix of excitement and disbelief. My sketches, born from pain and resilience, were going to travel, to speak to strangers who might see themselves in the lines and colors. It was humbling, but it also felt like a responsibility to keep telling the truth, to keep holding space for those who needed it. Preparations for the tour consumed my days. I worked closely with Rachel from the Art Council, selecting pieces, framing them, writing artist statements that felt honest without being too raw. My favorite was a drawing of a woman standing in a field, her arms outstretched, storm clouds breaking above her. It was me, but it was also Sarah, Kayla, Claire, every woman who'd fought to reclaim her light. I'd catch Marcus watching me as I worked, a soft smile on his face, and he'd say, "You're glowing, Em. You know that, right?" I'd laugh, brushing it off, but deep down I felt it, a warmth that hadn't been there before, a sense that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The loft was coming together, too, becoming a home in a way I hadn't expected. We'd found a big wooden table at a flea market, its surface scarred but sturdy, perfect for my art and our late night dinners. Marcus set up his record player in the corner, and we danced to jazz or old soul records, our laughter echoing off the brick walls. One evening, as Ella Fitzgerald's voice filled the room, he pulled me close, his hands warm on my waist. "This is what I dreamed of," he said, his voice low. "You, me, this life." I rested my head against his chest, the music wrapping around us. "Me too," I said, and meant it. For so long, I'd been afraid to dream, afraid to want too much. But with Marcus, I wasn't afraid anymore. I wanted it all, the love, the art, the messy, beautiful days. The support group remained a cornerstone of my life, a place where I could be both teacher and student. Claire was opening up more, sharing stories of her childhood with a lightness that hadn't been there before. One night, she brought a poem she'd written, her voice steady as she read it aloud. It was about a girl who'd learned to fly, her wings patched but strong. And when she finished, the room was silent, then filled with soft applause. "You're a poet," I told her, my eyes stinging. She blushed, but her smile was radiant, and I saw a piece of myself in her, the woman I was becoming, step by step. Sarah and Kayla were thriving too. We met for brunch one Sunday, piling into a booth at a cafe with mismatched mugs and the best pancakes in the city. Sarah was planning a trip with her new boyfriend, her face glowing as she talked about their hiking plans. Kayla was deep in her college life, juggling classes and a part-time job, but she was happy, her laughter bright and unforced. "I got an A on my psych paper," she said, grinning. "It was about trauma and resilience." "Guess who inspired it?" I laughed, nudging her with my elbow. "You're going to change the world, you know that?" "Right back at you," she said, and we clinked our coffee mugs, a toast to the women we were becoming. But the past, as always, had a way of weaving itself into the present. I'd kept my mom's letter, the one I'd written but hadn't sent, in my drawer, a quiet reminder of the choice I'd yet to make. I didn't think about her every day, but she was there, a shadow at the edges of my thoughts. Then, one crisp October morning, I got a package in the mail. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, with my mom's handwriting on the label. My heart thudded as I carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen table like it might break. Marcus was at work, the loft quiet except for the hum of the radiator. I sat, staring at the package, my hands folded in my lap. A memory flickered. Me at 7, sitting at our old kitchen table in Willow Creek. My mom wrapping a birthday gift in newspaper because we'd run out of wrapping paper. She'd laughed, her hands quick and sure, and I'd felt so loved, so safe. Now, the sight of her handwriting brought a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. I opened it slowly, the paper crinkling under my fingers. Inside was a small wooden box, the kind you might keep jewelry in, and a folded note. I opened the note first, my breath shallow. Asterisk. Emily, asterisk asterisk. "I found this when I was cleaning out the house. It was in your old room, tucked under a floorboard. I don't know if you meant to leave it, but I thought you should have it. I'm living in a small place now, trying to start over. It's not easy, but I'm learning. I think of you every day, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become. I hope you're happy. Asterisk asterisk love, Mom asterisk." I set the note down, my hands trembling, and opened the box. Inside was a necklace, a simple silver chain with a tiny star pendant, the one my dad had given me when I was 10 before he left. I'd hidden it under the floorboard when Jack moved in, afraid he'd take it, afraid he'd taint it. I'd forgotten it was there, a piece of my childhood buried with the pain. Now, holding it in my hands, I felt a rush of grief and gratitude for the girl who'd kept it safe, for the woman who could hold it now. I didn't cry, but I sat there for a long time, the necklace cool against my palm. I thought about my mom, about the effort it must have taken to send this, to reach out without expecting anything back. I thought about the woman she was trying to become, the one who was facing her mistakes, just as I'd faced mine. I slipped the necklace on, the star resting against my collarbone, and felt a quiet connection. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an acknowledgement that we were both still here, still trying. I wrote her back that night, a short letter, not the one I'd written before, but a new one. Simpler dot asterisk, mom, comma, asterisk, asterisk. Thank you for the necklace. It means more than you know. I'm doing well. My art is taking me places, and I'm happy. Really happy. I'm not ready for more yet, but I'm glad you're trying. Keep going. Dot asterisk. Asterisk. Emily asterisk. I mailed it the next day, my hand steady as I dropped it in the box. It wasn't a reunion, wasn't a promise, but it was a step. And that was enough. Dot. The tour began in Chicago, a city that felt alive with possibility. The gallery was packed, the air humming with voices and the clink of glasses. I stood by my work, my heart pounding, but my smile genuine, as people asked about the stories behind the art. Marcus was there, his hand brushing mine, and Sarah and Kayla drove up for the opening, their hugs warm and fierce. Detective Mitchell sent a card, her handwriting neat. You're changing lives, Emily. Keep shining. Dot asterisk. As I looked out at the crowd, at the faces lit by the soft glow of the gallery lights, I felt a peace that ran deeper than words. The past was still there, a quiet echo, but it didn't define me. I was Emily Hayes, artist, survivor, lover, friend, and I was writing my story, one moment at a time. The road ahead was uncertain, but I wasn't afraid. I was ready, my heart open, my roots deep, my wings patched but strong. I stepped outside, the Chicago skyline glittering against the night, and took a deep breath. The air was cool, the stars faint but steady, and I smiled. Because I knew no matter what came next, I was free. Dot. The Chicago opening was a high I rode for weeks, a spark that lit up everything else in my life. The tour moved to St. Louis next, then Cleveland, each city a new canvas for my story. I'd walk into galleries, my heart pounding, and watch strangers connect with my work, some with quiet nods, others with tears they tried to hide. People would approach me after, their voices soft, sharing fragments of their own lives. A sister who'd survived, a friend who hadn't, a wound they were still learning to carry. I listened, my hands clasped, and felt the weight and privilege of being trusted with their truths. My art wasn't just mine anymore. It was a bridge, a mirror, a hand reaching out. Dot. Back in Indianapolis, the loft felt like home in a way I'd never known. Marcus and I had settled into a rhythm, our lives woven together in the small, beautiful ways, his socks mixed with mine in the laundry, my sketches scattered on the table next to his books, our laughter filling the space when we burned dinner or tripped over boxes we still hadn't unpacked. One morning, as we sat at our big wooden table, sunlight streaming through the windows, he slid a mug of coffee toward me and said, I think we should get a dog. I laughed, nearly spilling my drink. A dog? Where'd that come from? He shrugged, his grin boyish. I don't know, I just see us with one, running around, chewing up your sketch pads, making a mess. Feels right. I looked at him, his dark eyes warm and steady, and felt a swell of love so big it almost hurt. Okay, I said, smiling. Let's get a dog. We spent the next few weeks visiting shelters, meeting floppy-eared mutts and shy puppies, until we found Luna, a scruffy terrier mix with eyes that seemed to see right through you. She bounded into our lives, her tail a blur, and suddenly our loft was filled with the sound of paws on hardwood and the occasional chewed-up shoe. Luna became our partner in crime, curling up at my feet while I sketched or nudging Marcus's hand when he tried to read. She was chaos and joy, and she made our home feel even more ours. Dot. The support group was still a cornerstone, a place where I could be raw and real. Claire had become a regular, her presence steady, her stories laced with a quiet strength. One evening, she brought a photo to share, a faded snapshot of her as a girl standing by a river, her smile wide and unburdened. This is who I was before, she said, her voice soft but clear. I'm trying to find her again. I looked at the photo, the girl's eyes bright with possibility, and thought of my own childhood. The moments before Jack, before the silence. She's still in there, I told Claire, my hand resting on hers. You're bringing her back, piece by piece. After the session, I drove to the lake, Luna in the back seat, her nose pressed against the window. The water was calm, reflecting the last of the sunset, and I sat on the shore, letting Luna chase pebbles in the shallows. A memory came. Me at 11, sitting by the lake in Willow Creek, my dad teaching me how to skip stones. It's all in the wrist, Em, he'd said, his laugh warm. I'd kept one of those stones in my pocket for years, a talisman against the world. Now I picked up a smooth, flat stone and skipped it across the water, watching the ripples spread. Luna barked, delighted, and I laughed. The sound carrying over the lake. My mom's presence lingered, not as a wound, but as a question. I'd sent her the letter, a small gesture that felt like enough for now, but I hadn't heard back. I didn't expect to, not really, but I wondered about her, where she was, who she was becoming. Then, one chilly November afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I was in the loft, painting a new piece for the tour, my hands streaked with blue. I wiped them on a rag and answered, my voice cautious. Hello? Emily? It was her. Her voice softer than I remembered, but unmistakable. It's... it's Mom. I froze, the paintbrush slipping from my fingers. Luna looked up from her bed, her ears perked. Hi, I said, my throat tight. I didn't expect to hear from you. I know, she said, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. I got your letter. I didn't know if I should call, but I wanted to thank you for writing, for giving me that much. I sat on the couch, pulling my knees to my chest. I meant what I said, I told her. I'm not ready for more, but I'm glad you're trying. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing, slow and careful. I'm in a new place now, she said finally. A little apartment outside Indianapolis. I'm working at a library, shelving books. It's quiet, but it's good. I'm learning who I am without him. I closed my eyes, picturing her in a small apartment, surrounded by books, her hands steady as she worked. It was a version of her I didn't know, but it felt real, like she was finally stepping out of Jack's shadow. That sounds nice, I said, and meant it. We talked for a few minutes, not about the past, but about small things, her job, my art, the weather. It was awkward, tentative, like two people meeting for the first time, but it was something. When we hung up, I didn't cry, but I felt a shift, a softening of the edges I'd built around her memory. I didn't know if we'd talk again, if we'd ever be more than this, but for now it was enough. The tour wrapped in December, the final show in Cleveland, a blur of lights and voices. Sarah and Kayla came, their hugs warm, their pride palpable. Marcus was there too, his arm around me as we watched people move through the gallery. You did it, Em, he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. You changed the game, I smiled, leaning into him. We did it, I said, because it was true. I hadn't done this alone. Sarah, Kayla, Claire, Marcus, even Detective Mitchell. They'd all been part of it. Pieces of the strength I'd found. Back home. The holidays were quiet but full. Marcus and I decorated a scrappy little Christmas tree, Luna batting at the ornaments, and we hosted a small dinner for Sarah, Kayla, and a few friends from the support group. The loft was warm, filled with laughter and the clink of glasses, and as I looked around, I felt a gratitude so deep it almost overwhelmed me. These were my people, my family, not by blood, but by choice. One night, as snow fell outside, I sat at the table, sketching Luna curled up by the radiator. Marcus was reading, his glasses slipping down his nose, and the record player spun a soft jazz tune. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who'd thought she'd never be whole, and the woman I was now, surrounded by love and purpose. The past was still there, a quiet hum, but it didn't scare me. It was part of the story, one I was still writing, one I'd keep writing. I set my pencil down and looked out the window, the snow catching the light like tiny stars. A memory came, me at 16, standing at the bus station, promising myself I'd survive. I'd done more than survive. I'd thrived. Not because the pain was gone, but because I'd learned to live louder than it. I reached for Marcus's hand, his fingers warm in mine, and smiled, because I knew, no matter what came next, I was ready. My story was mine, every scar, every triumph, and I was home. The snow kept falling outside, a soft curtain that made the world feel small and safe. I held Marcus's hand, his warmth grounding me, and watched Luna twitch in her sleep by the radiator, her paws chasing some dream. The loft was quiet, the jazz record spinning its last notes, and I felt a peace I'd worked so hard to earn. My life was full art, love, a home that smelled of coffee and paint. But there was still a piece of the past I hadn't fully faced. Not my mom, not Jack, but me, the woman I'd become and the girl I'd left behind. I wasn't running anymore, but I knew there was one last step to take, one last truth to claim. The new year brought clarity, the kind that comes when the holidays fade and the world settles into routine. I was back at the women's shelter, finishing the mural I'd started months ago. The wall was alive now, roots curling into wings, bursts of color that seemed to hum with hope. The kids would gather around as I painted, their questions bright and curious, and I'd let them add their own touches. A flower here, a star there. The girl with the braids, Mia, was my shadow, her notebook always tucked under her arm. One day, as we sat on the floor sharing a box of crayons, she looked up at me, her eyes serious. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked. "Even now, when you're all grown up?" I paused, the crayon still in my hand. A memory flickered. Me at her age, hiding in my closet, my heart pounding as Jack's shadow passed my door. "Yeah," I said softly. "Sometimes. But I've learned that being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human, and you keep going anyway." She nodded, like she was filing that away, and went back to her drawing, a bright yellow sun taking shape on the page. I watched her, my chest tight, with a mix of pride and gratitude. Mia was why I kept doing this, why I kept telling my story. Not just for me, but for her, for Claire, for every soul who needed to know they could survive. The shelter's director, a woman named Linda with a laugh that filled the room, pulled me aside that afternoon. "Your mural's changing things, Emily," she said, her hands clasped. "The women talk about it, how it makes them feel possible. We're thinking of naming the community room after you." I blushed, shaking my head. "That's too much," I said. "It's just paint." "It's not just paint," she said, her eyes steady. "It's hope. You're giving them hope." Her words stayed with me, a quiet fire that burned brighter than any gallery spotlight. I'd spent so long fighting to be seen, to be believed, and now I was helping others do the same. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building something stronger from it, something that could hold the weight of pain and still stand tall. Marcus noticed the change in me, too. We were walking Luna one evening, the streets dusted with snow, our breath clouding in the air. He looked at me, his scarf loose around his neck, and said, "You're different, Em. Not just from when we met, but from last year, even last month. You're settled, in a good way." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think I'm finally okay with being me," I said. "All of me, the good, the bad, the broken bits." He stopped, pulling me close, his lips brushing my forehead. "That's my favorite version of you," he said, and I laughed, the sound muffled against his coat. But the past wasn't done with me, not entirely. I'd heard whispers about Jack through the support group, bits of news that floated in like leaves on the wind. He was still in prison, his appeals denied, his name a stain on Willow Creek's perfect facade. The hardware store had closed, its windows boarded up, and the town had turned on him, their golden boy revealed as a monster. I didn't follow the details closely, I didn't need to. His defeat wasn't in the headlines or the courtroom, it was in the lives he could no longer touch, the voices he could no longer silence. Sarah had told me over coffee one day that she'd driven past his old store and felt nothing, not fear, not anger, just a quiet indifference. "He's gone," she'd said, her voice steady. "Not just locked up, but gone from me." I nodded, understanding. Jack's punishment wasn't just the bars around him. It was the loss of his power, the shattering of the mask he'd worn for so long. He'd thrived on control, on the fear he could instill, but we'd taken that from him. Me, Sarah, Kayla, all the women who'd spoken out. His shame was public, his legacy ruined, and that was justice, raw and real. My mom was a different story, one I hadn't fully resolved. Our phone call had been a bridge, not a destination, and I'd left it there, letting the silence stretch. But in late January, I got another letter, her handwriting shaky but clear. It was short, just a few lines, and it came with a small, worn book, a collection of poems she'd read to me as a child. Its pages yellowed, its spine cracked. Asterisk. Emily, asterisk. Asterisk. "I found this in my things. You used to love it when I read these to you. I don't know if you remember, but I do. I'm still at the library, still learning. I don't expect a reply, but I wanted you to have this. You're in my heart. Always dot asterisk, asterisk, mom asterisk. I sat on the couch, the book in my hands, and a memory hit me. Me at 6, curled up in her lap, the lamplight soft as she read about rivers and stars. Her voice had been my anchor then, my safe place. Now, holding the book, I felt a pang of loss. Not for her, but for the mother I'd thought she was. I didn't cry, but I held the book close, its weight a reminder of what we'd had, what we'd lost, and what we might still find. I didn't write back, but I called her. It was impulsive, my fingers dialing before I could overthink it. She answered on the second ring, her voice surprised but warm. Emily? Hi, Mom, I said, my throat tight. I got the book. We talked for a while, longer than last time, about small things. Her job, my art, the way Luna chewed up one of Marcus's socks. It wasn't deep, wasn't a reckoning, but it was honest, and that was enough. When we hung up, I felt lighter, like I'd set down a stone I hadn't known I was carrying. I wasn't ready to invite her into my life, but I was open to the possibility, and that was a transformation I hadn't expected. The girl who'd left Willow Creek, broken and betrayed, would have never made that call. The woman I was now could, and that was victory.life after the tour was a new kind of normal, one I built with intention. Marcus and I adopted a routine. Mornings with coffee and sketches, evenings with Luna's walks and quiet talks about the future. We were planning a trip, maybe to the mountains, a chance to breathe and dream. My art was thriving, with new commissions coming in, including a book cover for a memoir about survival. I'd sit at our table, Luna at my feet, and lose myself in the work. Each stroke a reminder of how far I'd come. The support group grew. New faces joining, old ones moving on. Claire published her poem in a local journal, her smile radiant when she showed us the page. Sarah got engaged, her ring glinting as she told us the story, and Kayla aced her finals, her texts full of emojis and pride. I watched them, my heart full, and saw the ripple effect of our courage, not just in our lives, but in the lives we touched. One spring morning. I drove to the lake, Luna bounding in the back seat. The air was warm, the water sparkling, and I sat on the shore, my sketch pad open. I drew a woman standing tall, her shadow soft, her eyes fixed on the horizon. It was me, but it was also every woman who'd fought to be heard, every soul who'd found their way home. A memory came. Me at 16, standing at the bus station, my backpack heavy, my heart heavier. I'd promised myself I'd survive, and I had. More than that, I'd lived. I closed the sketch pad and picked up a stone, smooth and cool in my hand. I skipped it across the water, watching the ripples spread, each one reaching farther than the last. Luna barked, her tail wagging, and I laughed, the sound free and full. The past was there, a quiet echo, but it didn't own me. I was Emily Hayes, artist, lover, survivor, whole, and I was writing my story, one ripple at a time. I stood, brushing the dirt from my jeans, and looked out at the lake, the sunlight dancing on its surface. I didn't need to look back. Didn't need to carry the weight anymore. I was enough just as I was, and that was everything. I took Luna's leash, her warmth beside me, and walked toward the car, the horizon open and bright. One ripple at a time, I thought, and smiled.